palm-lined beaches, crystal clear water, dazzling white luxury villas under the Caribbean sun. A real paradise, right? Not even close. Because what you are looking at right now is Little St. James, Jeffrey Epstein's infamous island, where, according to survivors and investigators, he and members of his elite circle committed unimaginable crimes for years. And in fact, the entire island was reportedly designed from the very beginning to leave victims with almost no way out. In this video, we are going to show you the exact layout of this diabolical place and reveal where the unimaginable and cruel things allegedly happened. You're about to get a look behind the sinister scenes of Little St. James, so stay tuned. To understand why this place was so perfect for an elite criminal network, we first need to take a quick look at the map. Little St. James is a small, rocky, rugged private island in the Caribbean Sea, about 3 kilometers off the coast of St. Thomas. It belongs to the US Virgin Islands and covers almost 29 hectares of land. In April 1998, Jeffrey Epstein bought the island through a shell company for almost $8 million. And he did so because it was ideal for his horrific plans. Little St. James can be reached quickly by boat or helicopter, but at the same time it is isolated enough that no one could escape from it by swimming. Right after the purchase, Jeffrey Epstein began rebuilding the island. More specifically, he divided it into 3 zones, designed to keep the VIP guests, the maintenance staff, and above all the countless female visitors, or more accurately, victims, strictly separated from one another. So, in what follows, we will now introduce you to these 3 zones. Let's begin with Zone 1, the northern part of the island, where the most powerful people in the world were received. The center of this zone was the main house, a gigantic Caribbean colonial-style residence, painted pale yellow with bright blue shutters. It stood on the highest point of the northern half of the island and had a huge veranda that offered VIP guests a spectacular view over the island and the ocean. Directly behind it was a massive pool complex with 4 luxury cabanas, meaning smaller guest houses right next to the pool. But behind, or rather beneath, this beautiful backdrop, there were hidden steel doors and concealed staircases leading down into lower, underground levels. And of course, that was not without reason. This architecture reportedly made it possible for female guests to be brought unnoticed into the lower levels, without the prominent guests upstairs by the pool suspecting anything, or at least allowing them to pretend they suspected nothing. As we now know from the Epstein files, celebrities such as former President Bill Clinton, the former British Prince Andrew, astrophysicist Stephen Hawking, Google co-founder Sergey Brin, and many other billionaires and politicians attended parties here. Thanks to the architecture of Zone 1, everyone here could feel certain they were undisturbed and unobserved. At the same time, they could also disappear quickly and discreetly behind the scenes whenever they wanted to make use of certain services. While Zone 1 was essentially the stage of the island, Zone 2 in the middle of the island can be described as its machinery. What may sound boring at first glance was actually the main reason Jeffrey Epstein was able to operate undisturbed on his island for so long. There was no fresh water anywhere on Little St. James, and there were no power cables connecting it to the mainland. In reality, the billionaire would have had to constantly fly in external maintenance workers to keep the island running. That, of course, would have increased the chance that someone might accidentally notice the terrible things happening on Little St. James and report them. So, through Zone 2, Jeffrey Epstein made his island almost completely self-sufficient. In the center of the island, there were gigantic diesel generators for electricity, storage rooms, construction machinery, and a huge seawater desalination plant for fresh drinking water. To keep everything running, fuel naturally had to be delivered regularly. But this was done very discreetly through a hidden dock, so remote that during diesel deliveries you could barely see the rest of the island at all. Zone 2 also contained the so-called staff house, which looked completely different from the guest villas in Zone 1. It sat on a rise, isolated from the rest of the luxury, and looked like a massive bunker. It had a long row of windows, and drone analyses showed that these windows were hermetically sealed and covered over. Forensic experts and investigators therefore believe that this building may have been used to house Epstein's countless young women, and in some cases underage girls, or more accurately, to lock them up. Inside this bunker, they were kept hidden away, invisible to the arriving VIP guests in the north until someone came to collect them. Not far from this bunker, by the way, there was also a gigantic sundial set into the ground, surrounded by exactly 13 brightly painted park benches. What these design elements were supposed to mean, however, is still not known. Now we come to Zone 3. At the far southwestern tip of the island stood the most visually striking and probably the most disturbing structure on all of Little St. James, namely the Temple. The temple was a square, monolithic building painted with glaring blue and white stripes. On the roof was a massive dome painted gold. There were also statues of the sea god Poseidon. At the front, the temple had huge wooden doors. But anyone who looked more closely could see that they were actually only painted on fake doors that could not be opened. In general, from the outside, the entire building was really just a facade. Inside, there was allegedly only a huge music room with a grand piano and other instruments. In reality, however, it is said to have been a gigantic, gutted, empty room. During drone flyovers, mattresses lying on the floor could also be identified inside the building. In this bizarre structure, investigators and observers believe dark, ritualized sexual acts and extreme abuse may have taken place. The area around the temple also points in that direction. In fact, there were hidden heavy steel doors there that led directly into the solid rock of the hill. Industrial ventilation shafts also protruded from the ground everywhere. That in turn suggests that Epstein may have operated a vast network of underground tunnels and rooms there. It is even suspected that victims were transported through these tunnels, and that there may also have been dungeon-like rooms there. Also hidden in the south was Epstein's private landfill. Since he did not want to send any garbage to the mainland, everything here, from broken furniture to incriminating evidence, was simply buried deep in the earth. But to make absolutely sure that none of the victims could escape, Epstein had also built a technical surveillance network on his island. A huge telecommunications tower in the south of the island was connected to Wi-Fi repeaters on every building. Witnesses reported a control room where Epstein could monitor every corner of the island and its buildings on banks of monitors. Tiny cameras, no bigger than the head of a pin, were hidden everywhere, for example in bathrooms, above toilets, or above beds. And this did not just stop the girls from even thinking about escape. In fact, Jeffrey Epstein also allegedly used this system to deliberately film his high-ranking VIP guests during sexual acts. Ultimately, the entire island was designed so that the billionaire could produce blackmail material, so-called compromat, against some of the most powerful men in the world. And anyone who tried to flee despite this surveillance system never got far. The waters around Little St. James were full of sharks and dangerous currents. In 2007, Epstein victim Sarah Ransom nevertheless tried, in complete desperation, to escape from the island by swimming. Epstein immediately mobilized search teams with floodlights. Sarah Ransom was pulled from the water, dragged back to the island, and then suffered brutal punishments and food deprivation at the hands of Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. Incidentally, Ghislaine Maxwell, alongside Jeffrey Epstein himself, was largely responsible for the fact that the island functioned so well for years, because she was responsible for so many victims being brought onto the island and taken away from it again without anyone noticing. Ghislaine Maxwell recruited girls all over the world and offered them lucrative but supposedly harmless jobs. They were then transported on Epstein's private Boeing 727, the infamous Lolita Express, as well as his own helicopters or private yachts. In plain terms, the girls were transported from the world's major cities directly to the temple or the bunkers of St. James without ever passing through border control or the police. That way, nobody except the perpetrators knew who was on Epstein's island. But to conclude, one question still remains. What has happened to the island since Epstein's death, and what does it look like today? In fact, after countless lawsuits and multi-million-dollar settlements to compensate victims, Little St. James was sold in May 2023 to billionaire Stephen Dekoff for $60 million. His plan is to build a luxury resort there. Current drone footage shows that, to do so, he is apparently trying to erase all architectural reminders of the island's dark past. The formerly blue and white striped temple, for example, has been completely painted over in bright white. A number of structures have also already been demolished. Instead, fire pits and wooden benches that look completely out of place have been installed, as if desperately trying to force a resort atmosphere onto the island. At the same time, the island remains an absolute fortress even today. Guard dogs and security personnel patrol everywhere. Whether a peaceful luxury resort will ever truly be created here, and above all, who would ever want to visit it, given the island's horrific history, remains an open question. And what shocked or surprised you the most about Epstein's Island? Write it in the comments. Bye, and see you next time.